This slideshow will walk you through some of the major areas of concern that you need to address when you design an oral history project. Basically, these areas fall into 3 categories. First, what do you want to know, or why are you doing this project? This pertains to the focus, thematic or otherwise, of the project and the questions that you're asking. 2, who will you interview? Who do you need to talk to in order to understand your topic? Why are you talking to them, and what will you ask them? And 3, what will you do with this stuff once you get it? This relates not only to how you will process and edit and work with the interviews, but also how you will interpret them and what end products you'll generate out of the interviews. Let's start with the first one. What do you want to know? Another way of asking this is to ask, why are you doing this project? It's an important first question because in answering it, you define a mission for your project and a set of goals. Write down this mission. Be clear about what you want to know. It will help keep you on task and in focus. Also, each new interview may potentially open many new doors for a project, and you will have to choose which ones to enter, because let's face it, time is limited. Having a clear focus also helps your narrators. It gives them clarity, because each person you interview will wonder, why are they interviewing me? Some may even ask you this outright. So it's really important to be able to clearly communicate to a narrator just why you're interested in their story and what you're going to do with it. What is your project focus? There's a number of ways to slice and dice this. First is temporally. Is your project about a specific era, a specific historical moment, or an event? Locate your project in historical time and place. Topical. Are you interested in specific issues, ideas, experiences, or subjects? Are you documenting a specific group or demographic? Oral history narratives are inevitably organized around themes and topics. The more clearly you identify the themes that you are most interested in, the better your interviews will go. Also, keep track of the themes that narrators bring up naturally and incorporate these into your project design as you move forward. Another way to think about this is there a set of driving questions that are really motivating you, things that you really want to know, but also relating to significance. Why is what you want to know significant or important? What's so important about these questions that we need to understand them? Related to that, are you creating any new historical knowledge? What you do not yet know is important. How do you know what you know? Are there things that we already know because of what's already on the historical record? What can oral history add to that? Are there new questions that will open up? New understandings that will emerge through oral history? How are oral memories supplementing or revising the historical record? Or are we creating a whole new aspect of the historical record, new historical knowledge through interviews? Finally, are there current concerns, events, or community interests that are motivating you? Is there something going on that needs to be preserved or documented? Or can your project serve a current issue or advocacy effort? Certainly, the current oral history projects related to COVID-19 and the Black Lives Matter movement are examples of oral history projects whose focus is shaped by current concerns. So focus the project as much as possible. Outline a methodology. What are your goals? What is your thematic lens? What else already exists? And how does oral history relate to that? What do your narrators or stakeholders want? What impact can you have? What do you want to learn from interviews? Make sure you conduct background research and other secondary sources and know what else is already out there before you begin doing the bulk of your interviews. You can also think of your oral history project as being of a certain type, and there are certain basic types of oral history projects that we see over and over again. One is life stories. What are major themes in a narrator's life? How do they understand their life? Are there major events or turning points that shaped them? How do they remember or share their experience? Consider a life story a collaborative narrative, working closely with your narrator to shape the story. Maybe you're interested in doing a family history. Recreate the history of a family using interviews and other sources. What are the major moments or turning points in the family history? Important relationships or important figures? ways in which history unfolded across the generations, or a legacy that's being produced. Think about both continuity and change in the history of families. Community histories. Do your narrators tell a story of a larger community? This could be place-based, or it could be based in ethnic identity or some other kind of group or community experience. What are the major themes in that community's history, or major eras in its development? How is a sense of place created? All of these can be part of a community history. Has the community been a site of contestation or conflict in the past? How was the community formed? Maybe you're interested in storytelling. Here you would be looking more at conventions of narrative. How do people tell their story? Are there certain poetics or certain genres of storytelling in a community? Or do excerpts from oral histories thematically constitute a larger story or set of stories? Finally, there's the issue of historical memory, which of course cuts across all these other areas. But sometimes oral history projects focus specifically on memory itself. How and why do individuals and communities remember the way they do? What role does memory play in identity? Or alternatively, how do memories map a lived geography or sense of place? And also, what is the relationship between individual and collective memories? What do patterns of memory tell us about the meanings of past events? If you're focusing on historical memory, you want to look at patterns in how people remember, but also consider that what you document today is but a specific moment in the life cycle of a memory, because memory can change over time. So define your thematic focus. Think about your methodology. What role is oral history playing? And then finally, what type of oral history project do you think you're going to do? This, of course, relates back to the themes of your project, but also to the specific goals of what it is you want to achieve through your exploration. Having decided that, it's time to figure out who will you interview and why. Consider who can best address the questions you are asking. Are you focused on a specific community or group of people? Are you interested in an individual? Will you interview many, several, or just one person? Do you need to interview a diversity of people with diverse perspectives, or are you interested in a group of people who are very similar in some regard? These are all things that you need to think about. If you're interested in a specific time or moment, then of course you need to find narrators who lived through that experience. So more generally, how will you identify and select your narrators? Well, first of all, who do you know? Maybe you already know somebody who's a good candidate for a narrator, or maybe they know somebody, or they know somebody who knows somebody. All right, so start with who you know, ask around, get a sense of who might know someone who's appropriate. Or if you're looking at a group or community experience, organizations and associations can also be a good entree into a larger group of people. Entering into the network of an organization can help you identify specific individuals who may be interested in sharing their story. Finally, consider demographics. Do you need to interview a certain sort of person who fits a particular kind of demographic profile? Do you need diversity of demographics, or do you need a demographic that's relatively consistent? So think about the networks that you have that can help you identify people and forge relationships. One of the things that you might find when you talk to one person is that you can ask them, well, who else should I talk to? And they may identify 3 or 4 other people. You can forge relationships with those people through the person you've already interviewed. So think about how you're creating relationships before, during, and after interviews. Consider pre-interview outreach, attending community events, or participation in group activities to build trust and interest. Finally, develop protocols for your specific narrators. There may be a shared set of questions that you're going to ask everybody, but there may be specific questions that you want to ask specific individuals. You need to figure this out before you go into the interview situation and make sure that your narrator understands what it is you're interested in. This can mean developing specific sets of questions, or maybe specific topics that you want to talk about, but also allowing for customization and creativity so that new things can emerge when you talk to people. But you don't want to go in cold. You also want to make sure that you have all of your supporting materials developed, your release form, biographical form, and any other documentary pieces that you need to supplement the interview itself. Okay, so you've done your interviews. Now what do you do with this stuff? Well, first think about where you started. What was your project focus? What outcomes did you want to achieve? What themes were you interested in? This will guide in part how you work with your interviews subsequently. And the outcomes will also shape what end products you produce in the end. One thing to bear in mind is whether or not your interviews will be archived. Are they going to be preserved and made available to others? For those of you who are doing a COVID-19 interview, they will in fact be archived at GSU Special Collections, so you want to bear that in mind. But if you're doing another kind of project, or you're doing a project in the future, you want to think about, is it going to be archived? Do you need to build that in? Is there accessibility going to be an issue? And if you're thinking of archiving your interviews, make sure that somebody's actually interested in it and that they have the capacity to care for it according to professional standards. Also, related to access, processing and editing. How are you going to process your interview? Are you going to summarize it? Are you going to index it? We'll talk about all of these later in the semester. Are you going to transcribe it in part or fully? Will you be excerpting from it? To what extent are you going to edit it and how? Are you going to involve the narrator or narrators in the editing and interpretation of the interview? How are you going to provide access to your narrators? These are all things that you need to think about as you create whatever the interview is ultimately after it's done. So you'll have a master copy of the interview, but then you may have any number of other versions, a written transcription, a sound edited version, etc., or specific excerpts that will be part of the processing and editing of your interview. Finally, how are you going to share and interpret your interview? What outcomes did you decide early on that you might want to do? Is there a specific end product that you want to produce? This can be any number of things. A museum exhibition, a film, a podcast, a print publication, a tour, a map, or even a theater performance. Think about what you want to do. This relates back to, again, why am I doing this project? Who is interested in this stuff? Why is it significant? Is there a current concern or current situation that it needs to speak to? Think about how you're also engaging in storytelling. Not only what medium you're working in, but then also, are you interested in processing and editing and interpreting your oral histories as a larger story? Or are you alternatively, or in addition to, interested in analyzing them in other kinds of ways? We'll be talking more about this later in the semester, but you want to think about, as you are planning your project, whether you expect to do kind of a more of a story-oriented approach to the interviews, or whether you're interested in, say, like reconstructing an environment from the past and using oral histories in an analytical way to extract information and data. Finally, are there any ethical considerations that are specifically related to your project? At base, you certainly want to provide transparency, being clear about the project processes and aims. Give your narrators opportunities to share authority and collaborate by giving input. And also engage in reciprocity. Return their gifts of time, story, and attention, however you can. But additionally, there may be other ethical considerations inherent in your topic. Are your narrators vulnerable because of their experience? Is there any residual trauma? Do you need to consider offering or making available additional support? Are there issues of confidentiality or privacy that need to be considered? If you're interviewing undocumented immigrants, for instance, there may be real issues there of protecting their identity. And can you realistically provide this protection? Consider what you can and cannot do and include it in your plan. Finally, you may have additional considerations that you want to build into your research design. You don't necessarily need to do this for the class this semester, but if you were doing a larger oral history project, you would certainly want to bear these in mind. The first is, do you have any advisors or collaborators that you want to work with? Is there a group of advisors, members of a narrator community, community gatekeepers, content specialists, archivists, experts, media people, or even fundraisers who need to provide input and guidance to your project? This is especially important if you're working in an institutional or community context. What format are you going to utilize? And what equipment do you need? How are you going to record your interviews? Are you going to do video? Are you going to do audio? Are you going to do both? Are you going to engage in any visual documentation in addition to video, like taking portraits of your narrators and so forth? These are things that you'll need to think about, and of course they govern what kind of equipment you need to use. For this class, my assumption is, given the current conditions in our world, that you will be doing some sort of video conference call-based interviewing, say on WebEx or Zoom. But in other contexts, you want to think about, do you need broadcast quality recording equipment, or can you get by using a cell phone? Do you need to have a tripod, lights, separate microphones? What kind of microphone are you going to use? We'll talk later in the semester about how to decide this, but it's certainly an important consideration. Do you have a specific time frame you need to work within? Plan for how long you think your work will realistically take. In this case, of course, you have the frame of the semester and you need to work back from your final deadline. In other cases, oral histories may take weeks, months, or years, depending on the scope of what's being documented. Finally, do you need to consider budget at all? This would certainly be the case in any kind of institutional or community-based oral history project. If you have to pay staff, if you need to buy equipment, if you also need to have a server space in order to archive your oral histories and so forth. Are there any additional costs that are associated? One thing that you probably won't have is paying narrators, because we don't tend to do that in oral history. We tend to see the interview as a dialogic collaboration between two people and do not, in most cases, provide any kind of monetary compensation to narrators. And are there any additional considerations of storage and preservation? This relates back to archiving. Do you need server space, for instance? Do you need metadata protocols? Do you need a plan for migrating data over time? All of these are things that might be part of an archival approach to oral history. So that, in a nutshell, is your oral history project. So as you start to plan your project for the semester, remember the 3 areas of questions that you want to ask yourself. First, what do you want to know? Or why are you doing this project? What's your thematic focus? What questions are you asking? What do you want to find out? Secondly, who will you interview? Who do you need to talk to? How will you locate them? What will you ask them? Then how will you work with them? And then 3, what will you do with the interviews after you have them? Why did you set out to do this in the first place? Does that suggest a specific way of interpreting these interviews? Is there a specific topic or thematic frame that you want to return to? Or did new ideas, new stories, and new themes emerge from the interviews that you want to focus on? And then finally, what kind of media or approach will you use to share these wonderful stories with other people?